for joining me today. I'm Chloe Edkins and I'm the Research Director at Studio Into, an innovation company based in London. It's a real pleasure to be invited to speak at Miro Distributed Conference 2020. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about inclusive research in a remote environment. So at Studio Into we're a globally distributed and therefore primarily remote working team. And we really find that this remote setup helps us to foster inclusivity and diversity within our business. And also, when with this remote setup, we were really well prepared when the world went remote back in March. And however, one element of our research that we really didn't consider ever would be remote was workshops. But with our future road mapping projects being in quite high demand at the moment, we're really finding that we've had an uptick in the number of workshops that we are doing. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how our business model fosters inclusivity and a bit about what we've learnt about running workshops remotely. First, just a little bit about me. My name is Chloe Amos-Edkins. I'm the Research Director at Studio Into, and I manage the delivery of global research and innovation projects for clients who really want to explore their future consumer landscape and help with future product innovations. In the past, I've worked with clients such as Durell, aka Maxi-Cosi, Doc Martens, Samsung, Kenwood, really to name just a few. I studied traditional 3D product design at university, rather than digital product design, which a lot of people talk about these days. And my career to date has focused on consumer insight and futures research for product design primarily, and I also have a specialism in colour material finish. I've primarily worked for innovation consultancies, and in those roles I have really focused on consumer insights and futures research for product design. And in those roles it's really all about helping clients explore and understand their future consumer context, and how that can guide future product innovation and how those products could sort of physically manifest themselves in terms of their form and their colour and material and finish. In the past I've worked on everything from shampoo bottles to trains, planes, automobiles and even dildos. I will show my age by admitting the fact that I remember a time long before mobile phones took over. I like to sometimes think of myself as a very tactile person that's living in an increasingly digital world. So it's with a hint of irony, I suppose, that I now find myself as the Director of Research at a fully remote business talking at a remote working conference. So now just a little bit about Studio Into. So we are a specialist global research and insight agency, and through qualitative research we discover how local people worldwide really live. We research people's attitudes, their behaviours within their local language and develop strategies for global businesses and organisations. We work with businesses and brands that are operating in or indeed want to operate in multiple regions around the world. So we will sometimes work with international businesses that want to continue to develop in a way that retains local or global relevance, and also smaller brands who want to understand how they can successfully expand into new markets and future-proof those plans. Most of the time we self-recruit our research participants, and we often find that clients turn to us when they need to recruit hard to infiltrate regions, or when running multiple region projects simultaneously, or indeed when recruiting particularly challenging or hard to find consumers for a very specific topic. So we really help our clients understand their global markets and are constantly tracking macro and global shifts that are happening in the world in order to understand that wider context. But when this kind of research becomes really, really powerful is when you start to overlay this with cultural context research. And we say that we research in detail, but also in context to understand really how local people worldwide are really living, thinking, playing, acting, spending and behaving. So for us, cultural context research is a really important part of design innovation, because a person's culture and background really influences their perception, their understanding, and their behaviour. And really, this is such an important argument for conducting inclusive research in order to understand and reach respondents with viewpoints that might otherwise be overlooked. And this kind of cultural understanding is super important because, for example, just a few examples, in South Korea, new mothers stay at home for the first 100 days after giving birth. And in China, grandparents tend to move in with new parents for at least the first 3 years after they've had children. And indeed, in some European countries, parents won't actually wash their children's hair if they have a cold. So these kind of accepted cultural norms could really make or break a certain product launch if the brands in question weren't aware of them. So it's really important to kind of explore these situations ahead of any new product launch or development. But some of these behaviours really are so ingrained within certain cultures and so almost overlooked that people wouldn't even think to tell you about them if you did research conducted just on the ground. So it's not enough to just tap local insider knowledge alone. You really have to be able to view these insights through the lens of an outsider as well. So the way that we access these global yet culturally up-close insights through these hard-to-find respondents is using our incredible network of what we call local experts. And yeah, as I mentioned, we're a really globally distributed team. We're spread out across almost every continent in the world. We're not yet in Antarctica. But by the nature of our setup, we've really had to adopt and make the most of remote methodologies. And we've been structured in this way and been operating in this way since our inception in 2011. So we have always been globally distributed, and it's been quite interesting to watch on over the last few months and seeing the rest of the world catch up with us. The reason that we have this globally distributed team is obviously as a part and parcel of the work that we do, but it's also down to our company's vision. So we believe really in giving people the flexibility that they need to foster a sensible work-life balance. The company was founded by 2 women. 3 out of the 4 directors at the moment are women, and we all have young children. And you really only have to look at our people page here to understand how diverse we really are. And it's something that we are rightly proud of, and also something that we're finding that our clients are increasingly valuing. This remote and flexible business model setup offers great opportunities for our clients and our research, but it also offers great things for our employees, meaning we are able to attract talent that, for whatever reason, doesn't want a normal 9-to-5 job. So we often attract those studying masters, those who have children, or indeed other care responsibilities, or perhaps sometimes those who are starting their own business, which brings lots of diverse viewpoints and information into the company. So Into really relies on this diversity of expertise and experience, and kind of diversity of culture and perspectives that we get from this amazing network. So our local experts, they live and work up close within communities across the world. But back to my earlier point, because they have all lived and worked and studied abroad, they can also act as sort of cultural translators, because they're able to identify the important insights for a specific project for our clients, because they're able to view their own culture through the lens of an outsider. But in essence, we are, by nature of our setup, diverse and inclusive. So in terms of research methodologies, our background has evolved. We've done loads of research in traditional in-person qualitative methodologies, but we are increasingly moving towards fully or partially remote design methods. Prior to COVID hitting, what we would quite often do is our local experts would do in-person research on the ground in their region, and then that information would be fed back to our central team and synthesised centrally. But increasingly we're moving towards fully remote methods, obviously because of the situation we find ourselves in now. So a lot of mobile ethnography, digital diaries, Zoom-based one-on-ones are still happening, and this information again is all fed back to our central team. As well as that, we also conduct trends and future scenario research, expert interviews, user experience testing and competitor analysis. So we apply all of these different capabilities to explore new opportunities and new product development. We validate strategic positions, help brands develop their marketing strategies and enable future-facing innovation. But really, in essence, our business research setup maximises inclusivity and reach for all our research, our participants, our businesses and our clients. So, a lot of what we did was very easily translated to 100% remote research, really without affecting the process too much, or indeed the kind of quality or detail of what we were doing. But it is impossible to obviously ignore the challenges and adaptations that a lot of businesses have faced this year with the onset of coronavirus. So despite this very global remote setup of our business, a lot of our projects were disrupted still during the onset of COVID. But the network setup that we had really insulated us from a lot of this. And we were able to pivot most of our projects mid-flow. So just one brief example, we were running a project in Japan, which involved interviewing users about a new product prototype. And the client was really keen to experience the interviews firsthand, but obviously was unable to fly to Japan because of the situation. Joining the interviews remotely wasn't really possible due to the time difference. So what we did was we had our local expert in Japan conduct the interviews. They would relay those recordings overnight. Then the following morning, one of our Japanese local experts that was actually based in London at the time was able to translate the day's past interviews whilst sitting with our client in their office in London. And obviously we're there on hand to answer questions about kind of cultural nuances for the client. And obviously, this project was part of a design sprint, meaning it needed a really rapid turnaround. And this solution that we came up with meant that there was no delay to the project timings. So, despite our remote setup, in-person connections has always remained a really important part of our business and our culture. And prior to COVID, we would always try and meet up in person. Our sort of local teams would meet up in person, and that was just really to maintain that human connection, which can be hard to find when you're living fully remotely. And obviously, of course, the one thing with our work that we really would always have got on a train or a plane to sort of conduct would be the creative workshop. For anyone who's run a workshop, you'll understand that the location of a workshop is really seen as vital, and traditionally a workshop's ability to produce these really structured outcomes has required a very carefully selected kind of physical space, and you can carefully curated selection of tools and materials and equipment. And within those workshops, it's all about displaying and presenting all of the insights and stimulus that has been delivered, in the run-up to that workshop. Through our research, and also capturing all of these outputs that happens during the workshop. You'd have tons of whiteboards, we'd have pages and piles and piles of post-it notes, and really the workshop environment, that kind of physical space, was all about encouraging really creative big picture thinking, and also like narrower threads of kind of thinking and evolution. And it was very much seen as a place where you can kind of enable this very group sharing of information, but also facilitate these smaller breakout sessions. But obviously, when COVID hit, a lot of things that had previously felt inconceivable suddenly became kind of necessary. So in terms of how we have been using Miro, we did use Miro before the pandemic. We always thought it was a great tool, but we tended to use it in quite a consecutive way. So a designer would work on something overnight, would hand it over to another one of us, we would add to it or, and make adjustments. So it was very kind of consecutive in the way that we use it. But increasingly we're starting to use it and it's becoming a really vital way of how we operate as a business and kind of maintain some cohesion as a team. And we're tending to use it now in a much more current sort of real-time way. So, for example, we have created a virtual office where we now conduct our weekly team meetings. We display our monthly photo competition photos on a virtual wall, and we also share kind of personal and business news, and it just offers us an alternative to a physical space where we can come together and have a sense of being together regardless of where the team are in the world. And I think that's really important in terms of maintaining cohesion as a team, and also that kind of all important but sometimes elusive company culture. And then obviously the other key use for Miro for us has been to replicate that collaborative client meeting. So we've used it for sort of weekly meetings, but also we have started to use it for workshops. And we've now run a number of big workshops recently, because, as I mentioned before, a lot of clients with the current situation are questioning kind of what next. They want to understand, what they should be doing to insulate themselves in the future. And our global future roadmap research is offering strategic foresight and scenario planning for our clients. And it's really been in big demand from clients who are reassessing their situations as a result of COVID. So we've had to very quickly translate the physical workshop experience into one that could be facilitated remotely. And to be honest, this is something I really would have considered almost impossible, certainly quite impractical a year ago. But having now facilitated a series of client workshops using the Miro platform, and I now see it as a really sensible alternative. And I've just curated a couple of tips about working remotely on a workshop. So my first tip is prepare. Obviously, for workshops you have to prepare regardless of whether they're physical or remote. But with the Miro setup, a lot more has to happen beforehand, in my opinion. And this is really about kind of structuring the board, labelling the timings, explaining instructions for the participants that are on the board, so that if somebody, their Zoom call, their video call drops out for a moment, they can still see the instructions right there. They might forget what you've said or not be confused. So you can kind of have the instructions there on the board, and that really helps people to kind of stay involved and stay in the flow of the workshop. Templates. Obviously, there's loads of templates on Miro. At the moment, we are tending to create bespoke ones specific to the requirements of our workshops. But those quite structured frameworks for activities we find are the best way to get the best results. Certainly have a rehearsal with your team first, because I think something for me that was quite surprising was the difference in timings. The way that the time flows in a remote setup just seems like everything takes a little bit longer. So just definitely worth running through the workshop plan with a colleague or two, just to kind of pick up on any things that are not clear or that don't quite make sense, or where timings aren't quite working out. Everything just takes a little bit longer in a remote setting. I think about 20% longer, to be honest. And in these environments, thinking in terms of inclusivity, obviously people with different levels of experience with kind of innovation processes, and also the tools required might vary massively. So always worth trying to kind of bring people on the journey with you. And something that we've found quite successful is bringing in a diverse perspectives into the workshop. So we have included some experts or people outside the sort of immediate client team to bring in different perspectives, and certainly trying to make sure that you include a good balance of men, women and people from different cultural backgrounds. So tip number 2, this is possibly my biggest one. So try and assign a troubleshooter, somebody that is super comfortable with the technology. If you're like me and this is all a bit new, it's definitely worth having somebody who really is so au fait with any of the issues and problems that might come up during a remote workshop. So for this is a real no-brainer. The technical glitches will always happen, and it will affect the participants, but also you as a moderator, because if somebody is struggling to get onto a platform or struggling to get onto a call, you need to be able to continue with the workshop without it kind of impacting other people. So something that we have done is we have shared the phone number and kind of WhatsApp details of an assigned troubleshooter, and we've actually kept those details visible in the bottom left-hand side of the corner of the board, so that people can, if they come up against issues, they can access that person without it interrupting the flow of the rest of the participants. And for us, this was really good because some people, they might be with senior members of their team. They might not want to admit that they're having problems. So having someone that they can discreetly contact off the screen is a good way of kind of keeping people involved, instead of kind of people potentially dropping out because they're just having problems and can't get back in. Tip number 3, definitely, specifically when we're thinking about using Miro, it's worth running a training and intro meetup session. I believe there's actually a new user training program available on Miro somewhere, but we actually designed our own one just to make it a little bit more playful and fun. Because and the reason for doing this is because participants really will have very differing technical capabilities. Somebody who's very familiar with using things like, Photoshop or whatever might find it more intuitive, whereas somebody who is primarily desk and word based might not find it quite so intuitive. Different people will have different levels of intuitivity with the Miro platform. So we found that running a training session ahead of the actual workshop itself was a way to set a level playing field, so that everybody would be on the same page when they were going into the workshop itself. And what we did was we arranged a 1-hour informal training session before the workshop, and we made this a completely fun session. It wasn't about trying to produce any sensible work. We just had a series of icebreakers that trained the participants in order for them to be able to use the various different tools that were required. So things like creating post-it notes, voting, importing images, and so on. So you can kind of make this a fun session, but it's also an opportunity for an icebreaking for the team, so everybody can kind of get to know each other, have a little bit of a chat, introduce themselves ahead of the workshop itself. Tip number 4, don't forget a bit of fun. So an in-person meetup session is often a way of kind of breaking down barriers and everyone coming together as a team. So we found that the meetup session was one way of bringing people together. But for the workshop, it should be about supporting interpersonal connections and kind of trying to encourage that all the way through. It can sometimes feel you can feel far away from people when you're working remotely. And indeed, kind of digital meetings of any kind can seem quite intense. So make sure you schedule plenty of little breaks. We did some kind of fun activities where we just asked people to, for example, run into their kitchen and bring the largest item that they could find from their kitchen and show it, and then we would kind of discuss these things, and it just kind of broke the tension, I guess, ahead of going back into brainstorming sessions. So and that kind of level of comfort obviously will affect the output, because the more comfortable and relaxed people feel, the better it will go. So one clear benefit of digital workshops is obviously that they are very geographically accessible for everybody. It's much easier to fit a digital session into a day than it is to fly halfway around the world for a 1 or 2 day workshop. However, with these digital remote workshops, you really just need to work a little bit harder to mitigate any discomforts in advance. For example, for us as a business that works with global clients, participants and experts, English is quite often a secondary language for people, so obviously we need to bear this in mind, and also people might not be au fait with kind of specific cultural references, so it's just worth viewing the content of a presentation from an outsider perspective. And of course, don't forget time zones. It's always a challenge when working with global teams, but bear in mind if you're asking somebody to get up at 6 a.m, they might be a bit tired. So, in summary, ultimately for us, despite our original concerns, our remote workshops using Miro really have been extremely successful, and we believe that actually in some ways they can be more effective than a traditional in-person workshop. The platform is super inspiring and really easy to use, and we have found that even beginners are quite excited and inspired to use it. And in particular, one big advantage is that participants, whereas in a physical workshop you wouldn't want people to be sitting on their laptops and kind of typing away, in the remote workshop people can say, oh, I've thought of this image or like an example of something, and they can bring that information into the workshop stimulus and kind of use that for inspiration, which we found really, really helpful. We feel like it's a really good platform actually for more introverted participants. So the remote format is much more inclusive because they can add comment without having to speak or contradict team members specifically. So that's another benefit. We love the fact that you can really customise the experience and set up a flow ahead of time, so you can kind of brand it with your company information, but also the client's information. And kind of really make that bespoke to each client. And of course, not to mention, budget-wise, it's a benefit. You're not hiring a big space and paying for tons of food, but also probably more importantly for us, the fact that it means that we're saving our carbon counting, because we're not swallowing up all this money and carbon counting on travel. And really we can just be more inclusive by asking a more varied selection of stakeholders and experts to take part in our workshop. And then I think the biggest one probably for me is the fact that the output of your workshop is all captured and curated, and they're ready for you to start the synthesis process after the research has happened, after the workshop has happened, which is a real game changer, because obviously anyone who's run a workshop and used a lot of post-it notes will remember that feeling of frantically, trying to stick post-it notes to a big sheet of paper to kind of capture everything that's happened. So, what you perhaps lose in terms of preparation, you really gain back in that synthesis time after the workshop. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this presentation has given you a little bit of food for thought into how a remote environment can foster a more inclusive design research process. There isn't a Q&A session with this because this is a pre-recorded session, but if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me via LinkedIn or at chloe@studio-into.com. And I believe all this information is going to be captured in a Miro board, and I think you'll be able to ask me questions via the Miro board. Thank you very much, and speak to you soon. Bye.
A huge thanks to Chloe for sharing her practical wisdom with all of us. And we all know that async collaboration is critical for remote work and learning, so don't forget to add your questions to the board we shared in the chat, and Chloe will be answering them until tomorrow, and we'll share back with a full completed version. Next session is on building trust in a remote team. It's an exploration on post-COVID trends and methodologies. We're lucky to have Kelly Monahan from Accenture to join us. Look forward to it.